Hottest paranormal live show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe. Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, and
Honey, there's no volume.
Episode of Into the Fringe. And today we have guests Don Ecker and Tracy Tormé. And Don Ecker was the
no volume
research for the U.S. magazine, UFO Magazine. As a medically retired law enforcement officer, he puts a skeptical and honest eye on UFO and paranormal subjects. Ecker has hosted the critically acclaimed radio programs UFOs Tonight, Strange Days, Dark Matters Radio, and has been broadcasting about these subjects since before Art Bell. Tracy Tormé is the son of famous singer Mel Tormé, and Tracy graduated from the USC School of Cinema Television in 1975. His two early mentors were Joseph Stefano, creator of the original Outer Limits, and Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek. Tormé began his career as a writer on Saturday Night Live during the show's 1982-1983 season. In the 1980s, Tormé also wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation for the first two seasons. His first season episode, The Big Goodbye, earned a Peabody Award. He later wrote and was the associate producer on the 1988 film Spellbinder. Tracy has written, consulted for, and produced many other TV shows, films, and documentaries, including Carnival, I Am Legend, Odyssey 5, on which he also served as executive producer, and he wrote for the early 2000s remake of The Outer Limits. Tormé is perhaps best known as co-creator and writer for the TV show Sliders. Tracy also wrote the screenplay for the film about the Travis Walton abduction, Fire in the Sky, which was nominated for a Saturn Award for Best Writing in 1994. He also wrote the screenplay for Intruders based on the Bud Hopkins book of the same name, and co-wrote UFO Cover-Up Live. Most recently, he wrote and co-created the 2020 UFO documentary, The Phenomenon.
Turn it up as high as it'll go.
Welcome back, my friends, Don and Tracy, to Into the Fringe.
Well, that's the best I can do. I adjusted the volume as high as it'll go.
Don, can you hear me?
I went on
yes,
settings,
you're coming in great.
Made it as high as it'll go.
You're coming
Tracy,
in great, Gil.
Can you hear me?
Try that.
Tracy, can you hear me? I guess we're having some technical difficulties with Tracy. While people are rolling in, let's go ahead and say hello to some folks that are here.
Okay,
and Radioactive is
have
here.
them speak.
Go ahead, take it. You listen to yourself.
The Bodhisattva Kid is here. Hail.
I
Ari
unplugged it.
is here and says hello, sinners.
Try saying,
Darius
give me
Munchausen
directions.
is in the house. Herc 130 is here. Hello. YU
Give me
Tom is
directions.
here. Hail. Squirrel is in the house.
Turn up the volume.
And Don Cipolla is here.
It was working, right?
Nope.
It was. You said you could hear them when you first got it,
When I first got on for a few seconds.
and then it quit working.
I guess I will let Tracy know
I
inside the
don't
chat
know.
that we can hear him just fine.
I mean, I'm going on their settings, chat, Google. No.
I'll edit this part
I'm
out for
fine.
the
I want to close
for
this
the beginning.
down. I don't know how to do this. There's no X or anything. Doggone this thing. I don't know, Tracy. I want to close this.
We can hear you.
Yeah, you guys
Google
are
came
coming
on.
through, Tracy.
It looks like
We can hear you.
it dropped out. Here they're calling
Go
on the
ahead,
other
grab it,
end.
would you?
Was working, and then all of a sudden it quit working. So we know it was set properly.
Oh, 12 stitches today for John Paula. Ouch. That doesn't sound like that's any fun.
Oh, God. Yeah, but we're on a do not call list.
Who was it?
Medicare advisor line. Jill's not calling. All right, look, I think this thing, I don't know. I don't know why this is even up. Damn it. It won't stay connected. Why
We
won't
can
this
hear you
close?
just fine.
Maybe it's our internet problem again.
Tracy's had internet issues since he started appearing
Internet's
on my
fine.
channel.
Mute. That's on.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine, Gil.
Well, we need to have Tracy hear me fine too. Yutan says, tell them to restart their PC. When in doubt, always hit restart. I think they're on a phone is the deal. Rui Goncalves is here. Hello and
How
greetings.
do I get out of this?
Krampus Jeebus
Close.
is here. And I'll let Tracy know that we can hear you just fine. Maybe that will help. So much for my slick intro, huh, Don?
Well, you know, it wouldn't be live radio if you didn't have problems.
That's true.
Kind of like the early days of live television.
Oh,
Every
gosh.
once in a while, something would go just a little off, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Here, that'll make it a little more festive here. All right. Well, Don, until we have Tracy back, let's go ahead and get started here. So I wanted to announce that Don is giving away some autographed issues of UFO Magazine, which is very generous. You must be in the chat to be eligible to win. Thank you, Don. Also, can you give us an update about the return of Dark Matters Radio?
Well, it's possible that this is going to happen in January. However, I am currently broadcasting on 2 shows with Gary Kissel. One is his Wednesday UFO show, which is in the morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 8 a.m. And it usually runs around an hour and a half. And then Wednesday afternoon, Both Kissel and I are both military vets. We just started a show called Dangerous Military Nerds, just like regular nerds, only more dangerous. Okay?
Right. I love it. That's great.
So,
And where can we hear that? Is that on YouTube
that's-
as well?
that's on KGRA and YouTube.
Cool.
So KGRA Radio and YouTube. So that's what's happening there.
Right on. Well, I'm glad to hear
There you
that.
are. Give it a
There, I
second.
can hear somebody now.
Can you
All
hear
right,
us
you're
now,
set.
Tracy?
Now I can. First
Great.
time.
All right.
Outstanding.
Okay.
Got everything under control. Thanks as usual to Robin for dealing with the technical issues.
Thanks
on there.
as usual to Robin, he said.
She's awesome.
Yeah,
we
she's-
love Robin.
He says, we love Robin. Me too. I
And Herc
agree.
130 is a geek and a nerd and a vet, and he says, "Dangerous military nerds, I am in."
Yeah, 1 p.m. KGRA Radio, and on it's also on YouTube.
What day of
1
the week
p.m.
did you say
Pacific,
that was?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
So it's 4 Eastern time, 4 p.m. Eastern.
And that's on the
And,
KGRA YouTube channel?
Yes,
Okay.
correctamundo. You
Cool.
betcha. So
All
we're
right.
just like other nerds, only dangerous, you know?
Right.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask, especially Tracy, about any UAP updates you might have. Tracy, I know that you're in touch with Lou Elizondo, but he's booked out like an entire year at this point.
Yeah.
Lou ran the Pentagon's secretive UFO/UAP program for a decade, and he's been all over TV recently. But what do you think of what he's done since? And do you think he's only scratched the surface? And why is he only looking at military encounters of UAP?
Okay, well, he's sort of, fighting an uphill battle. He's there have been various factions in the government that are doing everything they can to drag their feet as much as they can. Certainly the Air Force, for sure, been doing that. And he's been getting a lot of attacks, too. I mean, it's interesting. And the Pentagon, I have a friend that knows people in the Pentagon, and they've really taken out after him, too. And I feel bad for him because he's a really honorable guy and he's trying to do the right thing. But it's a very stressful job. Definitely taking its toll on him health-wise. And, I would say supposedly over the next few weeks, there are going to be some announcements that are going to be pretty amazing. But he's always, swimming upstream with this. And it's really unfortunate that it has to be that way, but that's at least the way that it is right now.
Understood. As a follow-up, some people think that Lou has been an intentional distraction, and that by still talking about could they be Russian or Chinese is a single-minded attempt at denying the ETH. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, who are they saying is saying that it could be Russian or Chinese? Because whenever I've talked to Lou, he flatly says that's not it, definitely. So if he's saying that now, I'd be very surprised. What do you know about him saying something like that now?
Well, you know how when you go on those TV shows on the History Channel or whatever, they edit together things to make it sound like they want it to sound. But I don't remember seeing him do any civilian research. It seems like he's really researching the military cases, and because of ATIP, that it had to do with potential threats to our aircraft, war zones, not only the theater of warfare, but the nuclear installations, power plants, that sort of thing. But everything.
But Gil, so that I know that I'm not misunderstanding you. Are you saying that recently he's been saying it's Russian or Chinese?
Have
you heard that?
Yeah, that he stopped short of saying it's not from this planet or it's not anything any military on this planet.
Yeah, but those are two different things. I mean, he's been very careful not to say it's aliens, it's ET. He just doesn't do that because it's already a difficult enough job. And he knows as soon as he says that, the roof will come down on him. But I do know that he told me very early on they needed to eliminate possibilities. So they looked into the Russians, they looked into the Chinese, and then they looked into American secret weapons, which they were very suspicious of. And he's flatly told me that it's none of those things. And he's told me that more than once. But he doesn't say it's probably ETs or it is ETs or aliens are coming here. He just clearly steers away from that for strategic reasons, really. If you pressed him about it, I'm sure he would say that's the most likely explanation, that it is
but
ET.
He doesn't want
or
to
interdimensional.
Overgeneralize, I guess.
He just knows that there's a lot of craziness with this field. You got to understand, and Don will certainly understand this. When Lou first got involved in all of this, he really knew nothing about UFOs. And ever since he's been going down the rabbit hole to try to get to the bottom of all this, he's seen all the lunatics that come out of the woodwork. People like Stephen Greer and others that, I've even had long talks with him about this show, Ancient Aliens. And I've said, Lou, you realize when your show was running on the History Channel, you guys would be saying this really intense, serious stuff. The very next show that would be on would be Ancient Aliens, where recently I saw them on that show saying, maybe the Vikings were aliens. And I mean, they just come up with everything but the kitchen sink. Yeah. And he rolled his eyes and said, oh God, brother, do I know that? So he has always been aware that the minefield for him is some of the craziness in this field. And anyone that wants to treat the subject really seriously and not like a religious zealot, which some true believers are, they all have to be very careful about seeming to be nutcases just by even getting into this. Don, do you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but let me say this too. And I've always, as Tracy will attest, I've always been much more hard-edged about this subject, and I've got absolutely no problem whatsoever, and have done it many times, confronting the skeptical and debunkers out there in this field point on, okay? Now, I personally think that what Elizondo has been doing in a large part has been absolutely positive. And people like Christopher Mellon, which have attached his name to this, also has done an absolutely great job, in my opinion, for as far as they've gone. But here we are, well over 70 years since this topic broke on the national and international stage. And really, how much further are we now than we were 70 years ago? There were quite a few cases that basically surfaced in the past And I think it's high time, along with what is happening today, like the Nimitz encounter, for example, and some others that have floated to the surface since 2004, to resurface some of these cases and let us once again examine them, throw them into the mix to show the public at large that you bet your bottom dollar this is a real topic. For example, the 1952 July and August overflights of the nation's capital, where the skies were absolutely filled with unknowns, unidentifieds, bogeys that were not only chased by military jets, but there were many people at the time that were convinced we might be on the verge, literally, and this is not sci-fi, this is not science fiction, of an alien incursion en masse. Cases like the Fort Itipu case, which happened in South America, where a military installation down there was attacked by a saucer, attacked using projected energy weapons, which damn near destroyed the fort, injured many soldiers. How many people have even heard of that today? Practically none.
I haven't. I'm embarrassed.
The case in 1962 over Las Vegas, where a UFO, for unknown reasons, exploded in the sky. A lot of people were convinced that there was conflict. There was airborne war going on up there, quickly swept under the rug. I could go on and on with many of these cases, but first and foremost, I think Elizondo, I think Mellon, and I think others should expose once again and examine nuclear base incursions where even nuclear ICBMs were knocked not only offline. If we would have, God forbid, gone to war, we couldn't have used those missiles because UFOs interfered with them to the point where they wouldn't take off, and even destroyed some that actually had to be replaced. Now, these are the kind of cases that if they were well known by the American public at large, I think they would be demanding action. But yet, so many people are so timid about going out on a limb and showing the public at large what really has been happening. And let me just back off now. I didn't mean to go off on a rant, but these are the kind of things that should be exposed.
And, you know,
well, believe me, Elizondo takes the nuclear base sightings extremely seriously. I think that's one of the ones that had the biggest influence on him to get involved and go public, because Lou believes that there is a real possibility that this is a threat and that we don't know yet who's behind the threat or what they really want. But he certainly feels like since these things come and go and there seems to be nothing we can do about it, he finds that makes the United States very, very vulnerable. And Lou's a patriot. I mean, he's a guy whose family, I believe, escaped from Cuba, and they escaped Castro. And Lou totally loves the United States, and it disturbs him when he thinks something could be going on here that would threaten the country. And he's really serious about that. But yeah, Don, he definitely knows all about those SAC base sightings and the disarming of the nuclear weapons.
Because tonight's subject is UFO updates and best cases, we are going to get into some of those cases later. But I wanted to ask you, Don, Are there any updates on your lunar anomaly research, in particular from the Japanese Selene or Kaguya probe, the Chinese Chang'e probe, and the Chandrayaan Indian moon probes? And what do you think
Well,
about the prospect of the Artemis missions landing humans on the moon in the next decade?
that's going to be extremely interesting. Look, I was involved for well over 20 years doing some very in-depth examination of lunar phenomena and LTPs, lunar transient phenomena. And I was able to secure some extraordinarily provocative photographs from NASA archives, okay? Not my personal archives, but NASA archives. And they show, to my eyes, beyond any doubt, there are a lot of artifacts up there, and I'm convinced they are of artificial origin. In other words, not a natural process, but actually someone or something put these artifacts up there. Now, and I don't recall if I've said this or not, but at the very beginning of my lunar research with my original radio show back in the early 90s on the cable radio network, CRN.
UFOs Tonight?
Yes, UFOs Tonight. I exposed on my show the fact that the first astronauts that went up there, Apollo 11 and on, they were carrying weapons down to the lunar surface. Those astronauts were armed.
They were
Now,
packing heat.
They were packing 45 caliber automatic pistols. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes.
Has that been
they would
acknowledged
fire.
by NASA?
Well, yes. Yes.
Don? Yeah.
I just started to say, I called up NASA to verify that fact and spoke to their public spokesman. And after a little arm twisting, Tracy, the spokesperson affirmed that yes, they did have weapons on board. So obviously, my next question, well, why? Why did they go to the moon with 45 caliber pistols? Well, you know, if going to or coming back, something had happened and they had to abort the mission and they landed in a jungle or something. Well, we wanted to make sure they had a weapon if they needed it. And I said, wait a minute. Landed in a jungle? Since when did American spacecraft land in the jungle? And they didn't. Okay, they didn't. They all landed in the ocean.
We've all had splashdowns, and the Soviets were the ones that had bump downs.
Right, and they were landing in a desert, the Russians.
Yeah.
So anyway, that just didn't make it with me.
But in case any cannibals came after them, if they landed in the jungle, they could defend themselves.
But, okay, here's the thing. I got some photographs of the rear of the moon, the so-called dark side of the moon, primarily a place called King's Crater. And by God, there's a whole facility back there. As a matter of fact, in 2001, okay, I was invited on the Art Bell Coast to Coast program to talk about my lunar research. And I sent Bell a whole bunch of lunar photographs, including, now listen to this, so-called, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, boulders that rolled up and out of lunar craters, proceeding across the lunar landscape, leaving tread marks in the lunar dust and dirt, okay? Look just like a tank tread. Pictures from King's Crater, which showed clearly what appears to be radio telescope discs set up of huge size, lit. And the best way I could describe it at the time were Quonset hut appearing structures, like a military Quonset hut, if you're familiar with that. So Bell, when he first looked at it, and in retrospect, I got to tell you, and this is going to sound self-serving, but it's a matter of fact. Art always looked at me as a competitor. I was actually doing UFO talk radio while Art was still doing his political talk on satellite radio. Okay. He was doing a political show. So, and a number of times, and I was never shy about chiding Art on some of the guests that he had come on his show and never challenge, let them spew, just vomit this crap out. People like, Ed Dames, for example, Dr.
Doom.
Yeah. And Mel's Hole and, that kind of crap. So, and
I only learned just recently, Don, that there were people in Pahrump that would call in with the most crazy, bizarre stuff, and it was just sort of gaslighting the audience.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that happened. But hey, look, I'm never in a million years would I take away the fact that Bell was the consummate showman. Okay. He knew how to do talk radio. Some of the topics may have been pure garbage, but he sure knew how to spin it. So I'd never take that away from Art.
George Norrie took after him very, very seriously for that. There's a reason that he's called George Snorri.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. Oh, Lord. But anyway, to get back to what I was saying when I was on Bell's show that time, and I was on several times, but on that particular show, he started looking at these photographs, and I've got a copy of the show right here. He said, "Oh my," he said, "Donna, I don't see anything. I just see rocks." Well, the fact of the matter is, with these NASA lunar photographs, you've got to train your eye because you're looking at shades of gray. All right. And it's really, unless you don't know what you're looking at, it's hard to see it. But the craziest moment was when suddenly Bell went, "Oh, my, I see that." And he was talking about that satellite dish. Okay. So even I was able to turn Bell around a little bit. But there is some weird stuff. So to get back to your point about the Chinese, the Japanese, and what have you, it's going to be interesting to see because Gil, Tracy, you can think I'm full of it if you want. That's great. That's fine. Your prerogative. But I am convinced that the last lunar mission we did with humans, okay, because we did go back with a robot probe, but the last human mission up there, I am convinced we were chased off the moon. I am convinced. And what happened when we stopped with the Apollo program? The next thing was Skylab. Everything for the next 20 plus years was just low Earth orbit stuff.
Yeah. And don't forget, they still had a perfectly good functional Saturn V rocket that they intended to send to the moon that they just scrapped.
Well, there were 3 missions that were ready to go back in those days. Astronauts were trained. The rockets were built. They were just sitting down there. All they had to do was mount them and launch them. They never did. And when NASA was asked why, do you know what they said? And to this day, it still stuns me. Well, the American public, they lost interest in it. So we thought, why bother to go back to the moon? Well, let me tell you what, pal. In 1970, when I went to Southeast Asia, I lost interest after I was there 15 minutes. But you know what? They didn't cancel that. So that's pure. Can I say bullshit?
You sure can. You can say whatever the fuck you want, man.
That is pure bullshit.
This is not an FCC regulated platform. And anyway, fuck those guys.
Knowing that I was going to see you guys, I was thinking of a couple things that, I haven't really talked about publicly that much, but one thing that I can't talk fully about, but I've been involved with United Nations effort involving 5 or 6 different countries that are going to make demands of the United Nations to reveal things. I wish I could tell you what all the countries are, because some of them are fairly major, but I can't really talk about that openly, but because it's still in progress. But that's, you asked, Gil, what's going on. That's the thing that I've been focusing on lately. It came through Lou to me, and I've been talking to a lot of these overseas people about it. So that, if it comes to fruition in the near future, that's going to be interesting. I mean, it may lead to nothing, but just the fact that it's being attempted is a sign of progress. And the other thing I wanted to tell you guys, oh boy, this is a can of worms, but all my life people have been asking me if I've ever seen a UFO, and I've always said no.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a time out in the desert outside of Las Vegas where I was really fooled by something with my friend, and I decided it was the planet Venus. I thought for sure it was moving, it was changing colors, but it wasn't. It was just sort of the atmosphere and the optical illusion. And that's always been the closest I ever felt to having a sighting. But I've always been fascinated by people that I knew and respected in the field who have had sightings. And I asked them, down to the smallest minutia, to tell me about it, because I was living vicariously through it. Bud Hopkins had a particularly interesting sighting that got him involved with all this stuff. And to make a long story short, I now live, as you think you guys know, in a place called Escondido, which is north of San Diego. And we live on 5 acres on top of a mountain. Very peaceful here, lots of wildlife, million stars at night, that kind of thing. And about 2 weeks ago, my wife and I started watching this object right off our balcony. And, when I first saw it, I thought, wait a minute, what is that? And then as we watched more and more, it was a circular, large object that was hovering and moving slowly, changing colors constantly, and sort of the best description I can give is it was pulsing. It was pulsing. I originally thought it was strobing, but pulsing is a better word for it. And no sound at all. And my wife and I are watching this thing, and I'm saying in my own head, oh my God, I'm finally having a sighting. We must have watched it for about 10 minutes. And what it would do that was really strange, it would totally fade out. It would go from this big, bright, circular object to where it would sort of recede from our vision, and then it would be a black sky, and nothing was there. And I thought, oh man, it must be gone. then it would reappear again in the same place, like, 30 seconds later, and still morphing, pulsing, multicolors. And then this was the really weird part. I'm looking at it, and I see it split into two objects. And it was almost like it went from one object into two. And I said to my wife, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And do you see two of these things now?" She goes, "Oh, of course." And that continued for about 10 minutes where it did all this stuff. And so I went to bed that night thinking, oh my God, okay, I've finally seen something. And that would have been the end of the story, except the next night, my wife wakes me up at 3 a.m, and I was sound asleep and I was deep asleep. And she said, they're back. I said, what? Tracy, they're all around the house. They're back right now. Now, this is the crazy part. I was so tired that night, and I was in such a deep sleep that it actually occurred to me, oh, the hell with it, I'm just going to keep sleeping. And then I thought, wait a minute, if this is really something like we saw last night, I've got to go check it out. So we went out on our balcony again, and in roughly the same part of the sky, there were now what I estimated to be 6 to 8 objects. My wife thought it was more like a dozen. She's got better eyesight than I do. And this time, they were going all over the sky. They were weaving in and out, passing over and above each other. Again, that same kind of strange pulsing, strange colors. Not the colors you would see on a plane. There's nothing green. There was red light and white light, and sometimes they kind of glowed orange. And so we're watching this just in absolute amazement. And we both decided to be extremely quiet, see if we heard anything. Nothing, totally silent. And then, hope you guys can dig this, off on the horizon, we'd start to see one of the objects, sort of a new one, coming slowly toward us. And it would keep coming and keep coming and keep coming and getting bigger and bigger. And eventually, it would go right over our house. Slowly, right above our house. I told Robin later I thought it was like about 40 or 50 feet above the house. Robin thought it was several hundred feet. She's probably right. And that happened 3 times with 3 different objects. They flew right over my house. And behind us, there's like another mountain. And we couldn't really see back to where they were going, but they were disappearing behind us, straight over the top of the house. And we watched that for several minutes too. And that's it. I mean, I had those 2 nights in a row, and still, it just, kind of freaks me out a little bit just to talk to you guys about it, because once you see something like that, I guess I now know what people have told me in the past. You know it's not something of this world, most likely. So, for what it's worth, I wanted to tell you guys about that.
Well, that's very interesting, Tracy. And, if you were to talk to most people about this subject, they would automatically assume that we're talking about extrasolar visitors coming in from another star system. But the fact of the matter is, that's not the only possibility. There are several other possibilities of what at least some of these may be. And of course, we mentioned earlier, or it was mentioned, the possibility of interdimensional, a la Skinwalker Ranch, all right, which that seems to be a portal, if you will, where these things pop up. and something that I've become very friendly towards the thought that some of this, in fact, may be an ancient, probably human civilization that was here in excess of 12, 13,000 years ago. And at the advent of the Younger Dryas period, okay, when apparently Earth got clobbered by a comet, which brought a mini ice age into the mix for about 1,000 years. They may have left the planet and then later returned.
Or gone underground.
Well, that's exactly right. Yes. And we all, I think, accept the fact, and I think Elizondo would agree with this, Tracy, that down off of Santa Monica, out in the damned water, there has been for quite a while a suspected base out there where USOs, unidentified submersible objects, have been sighted, both leaving and entering the ocean down to this alleged possible base. So, you know, there's a heck of a lot of areas to look into, but yet most people examining this subject don't, as a rule, go there. Do you have any ideas on that?
I do. Personally, I think Mark Davenport's theory about them being time travelers, humans from our future, it holds a lot of water. And the way that he was able to describe it, you know, he was sort of famous for being able to take very high concept ideas and make them understandable to the layman. I think that the time travel aspect is, you know, as good as the extraterrestrial hypothesis or extra dimensional or whatever. Tracy, I just wanted to break in real quick and mention your mic is really hot. If you have a way to turn down the gain on your mic, that would be great. If not, we'll carry on. But
let me try. Robin, my wife is my technical expert.
Yeah,
Robin, I'll work on it.
and Walter
you
Bosley
know
is
that
here.
the time traveler theory I find particularly interesting. I'm not sure there's that much evidence for it, but if that ends up being true, that's just a whole new ball of wax. It's really interesting if you really think about it. So, and then of course, I think the interdimensional possibility is very interesting too. I know Jacques Vallée, that was like his big thing. He believed that for a long time. And he used to tell me that one of the reasons he thought it was probably interdimensional, how many cases happen where a sighting ends, where an object just disappears, doesn't fly off, doesn't go away, just gone. And that would indicate maybe it could be ultra-dimensional.
Well, a couple of years after I got back from the Army, John Keel's seminal work, The Mothman Prophecies, was published. And I had heard about it. I had read about it prior to the publication in, I believe it was Fate magazine. So I went down to my local bookstore and ordered a copy. As soon as it was released and they received it, I went down and picked it up, and I immediately read it. And I read that book probably by now, maybe 20, 25 times. The information in there is just mind-bending. Well, later I got to know Keel in the late 80s when I was involved with my mutilation research. And Keel had quite a bit of information about that. But how the interdimensional aspect turned up in my bailiwick via Keel was we were talking about some of his research and encounters dealing with MIBs, Men in Black. And back when Keel was involved with the Point Pleasant, West Virginia case in the mid 60s, he had more than a couple of encounters, and some of the things that were happening to him by his testimony to me were beyond bizarre. So one day we're talking on the phone, and I said, well, John, what is your bottom line about the MIB? And he said, you're involved in mutilation research, right? And I said, yeah, I did. I was. And he said, well, didn't you tell me when you were a cop that you had investigated a couple of cattle mutilations? And I said, yeah. He said, this is a theory of mine. And he said, there's no way at present I could prove it. He said, but I think that whatever is behind this phenomenon are coming down and harvesting blood and flesh, and that they are using the blood and flesh to create these cryptid creatures. For example, the Mothman, that was certainly a cryptid. Some of the Bigfoot creatures that have been reported, there are several types of Bigfoot. There's the 5-toed variety, which seems to be much more natural, but there's also a 3-toed variety that is often seen in connection with UFO cases. He said that very well may be where these things are coming from, that these intelligences or entities, whatever they are, basically are using this blood and flesh. Now, if you were to go back and look at the number of mutilation cases, and I'm talking about pure mathematics, just the number going back to the early 70s and coming forward, by God, we're talking about tens of thousands of creatures that have been mysteriously killed, mutilated, and pieces and parts removed.
Yeah.
Never one case has ever been filed charging any human being with killing cattle or an agricultural crime like that.
Correct.
Not one. And I know because I was involved in it as an investigator. So, this is some weird stuff.
Yeah, there is a lot of high strangeness associated with the phenomenon. Let's go ahead and kind of move back into our topic for this evening. And let's talk about what you both think are the best cases that might persuade otherwise skeptics that UFOs are real. I'm going to throw out some modern 21st century UFO cases, and I'd like to get both of your opinions of them as to how you think they rate in terms of importance and whether their impact is high or low. And then after that, if we have time, we'll talk about some cases from the 20th century. So the first one is the lights above the New Jersey Turnpike in 2001. It takes a lot for motorists to stop alongside a highway to look toward the sky, but on July 14th, 2001, drivers on the New Jersey Turnpike did just that. For around 15 minutes just after midnight, they marveled at the sight of strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation over the Arthur Kill Waterway between Staten Island, New York, and Carteret, New Jersey. Carteret Police Department's Lieutenant Daniel Tarrant was one of the witnesses, as well as other metro area residents from the Throgs Neck Bridge on Long Island and Fort Lee, New Jersey, near the George Washington Bridge. Are you familiar with that case? And if so, what do you think about it?
You want me to start?
Don,
Sure.
you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. And in many ways, that case reminds me greatly of another case further north of that in the Hudson Valley area of New York. Okay. Same thing happened where UFOs, unidentified objects, and some, by all accounts, pretty big UFOs were sighted. I forget now what that interstate highway is, but where literally traffic was pulling over to the side of the road and drivers and passengers were getting out to watch that. Same thing. Now, if you go to the state authorities, like they tried to do in Hudson Valley, they tried to come up with a very mundane explanation. Well, we think they were ultralight aircraft and pilots were flying in a formation just to, fool with the people on the ground. Well, that kind of stuff never, I never bought into any of that. If it would have been ultralight pilots doing that, they could have tracked them to wherever they ended up landing at.
Of course.
And somebody, because back there, New York, New Jersey, they love to find your ass if they can find out a way to do it. So sure, that would have happened, and it didn't. So yeah, I give high credence to that case.
Okay. Tracy, any thoughts?
I've heard of that case, but I really don't know much about it, especially what you were describing. So I'll go to the next one.
Okay. The next one is the USS Nimitz Encounter 2004. On November 14th, 2004, the USS Princeton, part of the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, noted an unknown craft on radar 100 miles off the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks, the crew had been tracking objects that appeared at 80,000 feet and then plummeted to hover right over the Pacific Ocean. When two FA-18F fighter jets from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz arrived in the area, they first saw what appeared to be churning water with a shadow of an oval shape underneath the surface. Then, in a few moments, a white tic-tac shaped object appeared above the water. It had no visible markings to indicate an engine, wings, or windows, and infrared monitors didn't reveal any exhaust. Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 attempted to intercept the craft, but it accelerated away, reappearing on radar 60 miles away. It moved 3 times the speed of sound and more than twice the speed of the fighter jets.
Well, that's, obviously a really seminal case. I mean, it's going to go down in history as sort of the breaking of the dam of secrecy, because the strangest thing about that case in many ways is not even just the sighting itself, but the way that suddenly the Navy was so cooperative with talking about it, with releasing the footage, with freeing their officers to come forward and go on news shows and things like that. Nothing like that has happened. I mean, that's what is so astonishing to me, is that the Nimitz incident seemed to be, what really got this whole disclosure, the reality of this disclosure going. So the Nimitz case, I think, is really important.
Definitely a seminal case, a case that will go down in the annals of this topic, this UFO subject. Now, I have mentioned this on a number of occasions. If we go back to the very beginning of when this topic became literally front page news, back to 1947, it was always first and foremost, the original United States Army Air Force, later the United States Air Force, a separate service entity that has been in charge. Now, almost from the beginning, okay, the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force has been basically stonewalling this topic from the very beginning. They've lied, okay, from the beginning. They've stonewalled. They have destroyed men and women's careers, okay, without an eye blink, okay, without an eye blink. They've done this. Now, since the Nimitz encounter, okay, the United States Navy, in a manner of speaking, suddenly shoved its thumb into the eye of the Air Force. Now, if you've never been in the military, you will probably not be aware of the intense service rivalry between the various branches going back, well, forever. Okay.
The Army-Navy game. Ooh.
Oh, yeah. The Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps. Okay. The Air Force and everybody else. All right. Now, a very interesting thing happened, which will highlight that around 1952. Harry Truman was still the president of the United States. And remember, the Pearl Harbor attack had only happened 10, 11 years previously. We were fresh out of the Second World War. The Second World War ended in 1945. This is 1952. The Navy secretary was on a fact-finding mission out to the Hawaiian Islands, flying back on his aircraft to the continental United States as they're entering, I think it was over California. Of all things, my God, a UFO buzzed his airplane. They all saw it. The freaking Secretary of the United States Navy. He gets back to Washington, D.C. He basically calls up his brother Secretary of the Air Force to tell him what happened. He said, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "One of those crazy flying saucers buzzed my aircraft. What in the hell can you tell me about it?" Well, guess what? The Secretary of the Air Force told the Secretary of the Navy, "You don't have a need to know." Now, think about that. You don't have a need to know. In other words, go shovel your shit somewhere else. I'm not telling you nothing. Well, obviously, that infuriated the Secretary of the Navy. Now, a lot of people may not be aware, but naval intelligence would give anybody a run for their money. As a matter of fact, they've had one of the strongest intelligence agencies of all the service groups, and probably even the CIA.
Now,
Now-
Don, doesn't the Navy sign the checks for most of the other branches?
Well, it signs the checks for the Marine Corps, okay? But no, DOD.
Yeah.
So anyway, now we flash forward to 2004. Now, I do not know this for an exact certain fact, but I would not be surprised, although we haven't heard about it, that the Navy, since at least 1952, have probably been running their own UFO research effort, okay? Because, hey, look, 75% of planet Earth is what? Water. And what does the Navy do? It goes all over the world. okay, on top of the water and also underneath water. So the Nimitz encounter happens. Suddenly, and this, I got to tell you, man, this shocked hell out of me. Suddenly, the Navy is all over this, talking about it publicly. The Department of Defense releases those videos of the Tic Tacs. Okay, Commander Fravers going on the TV. I mean, my God, 60 freaking minutes did a special on this. 60 minutes. Well,
The American one, not the Australian one.
yes, the American 60 minutes. But guess who has not said one freaking word about any of this? The United States Air Force. Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, all these guys have been all over the tube talking about this, radio shows and everything else.
Don't you think that's because the Air Force sort of shit their own bed when they closed Project Blue Book and said nothing to see here?
Oh, there's no doubt that, look, the whole closing Blue Book, they had been years looking for a way to get rid of this hot potato they had. All right. Even prior to his death, all right, J. Allen Hynek, which incidentally, I got to tell you, in many ways, I think Hynek was a weasel. Okay. In many ways, I think he was. But he finally was able to go public, basically saying, yeah, there's something to this after years. I mean, after the Hillsdale College thing in '66.
Well, I mean,
with
he did begin QFOS, right?
Well, he was one of the people. But his ludicrous marsh gas possible explanation in March in Michigan. I don't know. Have you ever been to Michigan, much less in March? You ain't going to see a lot of rotting vegetation.
Not a lot of marshes in Michigan.
No. So anyway, yeah. But the Air Force has never gone out with anything. And I find that, and I would think anybody in this field would find that pretty surprising, pretty interesting. And has anybody approached the Air Force about why they've kept noticeably mum?
I personally think that it has everything to do with the fact that they gave themselves a black eye through Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book. They had two people and a secretary. It was more of a PR campaign
than an
actual study of UFOs.
It was nothing more than a public relations ploy.
Stunt.
They collected hundreds, if not thousands of cases. And where are they at today? Where are those cases at? Okay. Most of them, or many of them, were never identified as to what the hell people were reporting.
They're probably shredded and gone at this point. But I do remember quite often Stanton Friedman saying, "Special report number 14, Project Blue Book, unknowns." You know, he would always stress that special report number 14 had some good stuff in it. Let's see if we can kind of get back to some modern sightings here. The third one I wanted to ask you guys about was the O'Hare International Airport saucer in 2006. Flight 446 was getting ready to fly to North Carolina from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport when a United Airlines employee on the tarmac noticed a dark gray metallic craft hovering over gate C-17. That day, November 7th, 2006, a total of 12 United employees and a few witnesses outside the airport spotted the saucer-shaped craft around 4:15 p.m. The witnesses say it hovered for about 5 minutes before shooting upward, where it broke a hole in the clouds, enough that the pilots and mechanics could see the blue sky. The news report became the most read story on the Chicago Tribune's website to that date and made international news. However, because the UFO was not seen on radar, the FAA called it a weather phenomenon and declined to investigate.
Well, I'm going to tell you the dirty little secret that the powers that be count on. Okay. This has been their best friend. As time passes, people forget. They stonewall until it's no longer a story. It's now a non-story. You're right. That particular case was phenomenal. And they counted on time passing and basically nothing really being done about it. And today, if you go to most people, even if they're interested, okay, if they don't have their phone or their laptop computer, okay, they're probably not going to know what the hell the O'Hare case was. If they do, then they may read this little blurb about it and say, oh, that's interesting. But so what?
Tracy, do you have any thoughts on the O'Hare case?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great case. It's obviously something very unusual is happening and witnessed by a lot of really highly qualified people connected to the airline and the airport. What's kind of amazing to me is something like that will happen, and most people will hear about it and they'll say, "Oh, that's kind of weird," and then they'll move on. And that's always baffled me, because I've always found this stuff so interesting when you just consider the possibilities. How can people hear about something like that and sort of shrug their shoulders? And that's happened a million times. I mean, it's got to be something pretty spectacular to get people invested in it. And again, I give credit to Elizondo, because whether you like him or don't like him, he's brought the subject into a level of respectability that it never had before. And I know he was involved a lot with the Nimitz case and with getting the Navy to reveal some of these things. But Gil, I have an answer to your earlier question about the most important cases, but did you want to go ahead and name a few yourself, or did you want to segue onto that?
I can spin a few off. The next one is the Stephenville sightings in 2008. And then we have the East Coast Go Fast video from 2015. And
yeah, I mean, the Stephenville...
Go ahead.
Stephenville thing is similar in a lot of ways to the O'Hare thing, in that something that was widely witnessed by credible people, and it made a dent in the news, but again, it wasn't really the news item it should have been. Same as O'Hare. So that's my thoughts on that one. Do you have anything, Don?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this object, whatever it was in making an incursion over the ranch of the President of the United States, George W. Bush. That's where that craft was headed. Okay, do you remember? That's what initially made such a splash, which, once again, they depend upon time. That dissipated. Today, if you were to ask even interested people, what do you know about the Stephenville case? The what? The Stephenville case. Where was that? Down in Texas. Yeah. This thing was headed toward the ranch of President George W. Bush. Oh, that's
no,
basically
you're right.
What you get.
It's one of those "this too shall pass" type things.
Hmm.
I mean, think about it. That's astounding to me.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is. Either of you have any opinions about the Go Fast video, the East Coast Go Fast video?
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, freaking amazing. Okay. Beyond, look, everybody talks about the Nimitz case out here on the West Coast. There was a hell of a lot of cases happening off the East Coast, from New York, off the East Coast, from New York all the way down to Florida. Pilots were encountering these tic tac type craft. I mean, I saw one video, and the pilot that was interviewed later, where one of these things blew between two F-18 jets, narrowly missing them. Of course, it didn't hit, but I mean, good God. Look, anybody that tries to convince you that the military doesn't take or didn't take this seriously because there was no national security implications, well, they're full of shit. Okay.
That's right.
But how do you really feel, Don?
Yeah,
Right.
well,
Tracy,
that's the way it
I've made the
goes.
mistake of asking Don in previous shows. Don't hold back. Tell us what you really think, and we don't want to go there.
I never has a problem with holding back on stuff like that.
I do.
You go ahead.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Go ahead. I was just going to say. Okay, go ahead.
I have another case I wanted to run past you. It's called the Melbourne 350. More than 300 students and teachers of Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia, saw an unbelievable sight on April 6, 1966, according to the New York Post. They were all looking incredulously at 5 planes that were attempting to corner and capture a UFO. This went on for a while before the UFO zipped away out of sight. It is reported that the headmaster of the school and even strange men in black suits told the students and the teachers never to say anything about it, even though it was witnessed by hundreds of people.
Do you know Bill Chalker, Don?
Yes. Not talked
The
to him
Australian?
in many years, but yes.
Yeah, this was a guy, Gil, that did a lot of great research in Australia and uncovered a lot of interesting cases from down there that would otherwise have been lost, we would never have heard of here. But it's another indication of how this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not obviously just about the United States. It's been all over the place. So it's a good Australian case.
Yeah, there are some really good Australian cases, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they are the land down under, and I think the powers that be count on the fact that unless it's unusual circumstances, people up in Europe and in North America probably aren't going to hear much about what's been happening down there.
Now,
do you know the Frederick Valentic case, Gil?
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah, so that's another one from down there that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know my I'm part of that case, Tracy?
No.
An old friend of yours, and I debated that Philip J. Klass, okay, in Colorado, in Denver, back in, I think it was about 94 or so. I was invited by Mike Corbin, who was the second director of the Paranet Computer Data Service and began his
his
own UFO organization called MICAP. Now, we had been friends. Mike Corbin and I had been friends for years. And I was then the director of research at UFO Magazine. And he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, Don," he said, "how would you like to come down to Denver and debate Phil Klass?" Well, I said, "Hell, I'd love to come down to Denver and debate Phil Klass."
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
So we get down there, and somehow I think it was me that brought up the Valentech case. And this is actually rather infamous today. You can find it on Wikipedia. I relayed the information of Valentech making frantic calls for assistance when this huge unidentified craft was over his small airplane. And then ultimately, his airplane and he totally disappeared, never to be seen again.
Not even
wreckage,
a single piece of his plane.
no wreckage was ever discovered, nothing. And then Klass did it. He suggested in this debate that Valentech might have been smuggling drugs on his airplane. And that set me off.
Which, of course, if you're smuggling drugs, it makes total sense for you and your airplane to completely disappear forever.
Oh, Phil Klass was a lying piece of shit.
Oh, yeah, he was a scumbag.
But you know what his reasoning was? You know what his reasoning was? Why he might have been smuggling drugs. Well, he had 4 life preservers on his airplane. What?
We
4
got
life preservers.
we got a dogfight going on in the background there.
And
Just another night at the Tormé house. Okay, guys, enough. Enough.
so anyway.
Okay, I think they're going to behave.
That was Klass's reasoning.
Quiet.
And even
Sorry, guys.
Valentech's family heard about that. Okay. Even his family, somebody reported it to them. So Phil Klass was a real despicable human being. He really was.
Yeah, he was a piece of work for sure. We are in our second hour. In fact, we are more than 20 minutes past the second hour, which is when we usually put in the URL for the spinner wheel for our lucky winner. So hopefully our mods will be hard at work at that. We do have a question from YU Tan in the chat. It says, Cardinal Sin, question for the panel. Even if the public at large could keep their attention on this, what could we do about these things? It's not as if we can force them to land.
No, you can't.
Well,
of course.
Yeah.
But
You talked to Gil about the Air Force and one of the reasons that they've been so uncooperative. I think it's really difficult for the Air Force to admit that there's something technologically flying around here that we can do nothing about. It's a very, big feeling of impotence on their part. And I think it rubs them the wrong way. I don't think they have an easy time admitting it. I think that's got a lot to do with why they've been so silent on this for so long. Go ahead, Don.
yeah, I was going to say about the only thing the public can do, and be ready because you'll probably get a tinfoil hat placed next to your name, but to go to your elected officials, your Congress people, and your elected national senator, your federal senator, and write them a letter, tell them about your concerns, encourage them to broach this in Congress. I'm sure today they could probably get other people within the Congress to assist them. And to call for open congressional hearings. And that's about the only damn thing you can do.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you guys that Elizondo went to college at the University of Miami with Marco Rubio. So that's one of the first people that he, got involved from the government on this stuff.
That's a
And
piece
Marco
of
Rubio's
information
initial,
I didn't have. That makes sense now.
yeah, Marco Rubio actually was one of the most aghast at this phenomenon because he realized right away, if something like this is flying around everywhere, we better start treating it with all the importance it deserves. And that's where a lot of this congressional mandate came from, that Lou had a personal relationship with him. And when Lou showed them, the congressman, some of the evidence that he'd compiled, basically my understanding was that their jaws all hit the ground. They couldn't even believe it, because again, you got to think that 99% of the people in Congress never thought there was anything to this subject. So to be proven that wrong was a real shell shock for them, to be really honest. So I think that that's another thing that Lou did that's leading to, really positive results, is that a lot of the people in the high levels of government now will start treating this with a lot more seriousness than they have in the past. That's important, I think.
Well, if it were well known that these things, whatever they are, can shut down our nuclear deterrence, I think that would be a freaking wake-up call.
Yeah, I guarantee you Elizondo talked to them about that specifically. So
I do have some cases that I would like to ask you guys about in kind of a rapid fire mode, and you both of you can just say either yes, this is a good case, no, I think this is full of shit, or expound on them as you'd like. The first one is and again, our audience is sort of an intermediate one, so they're going to understand a lot of this. The first case is Kecksburg. Where do you guys stand on the Kecksburg case?
I think it's an excellent case, but I think there's good evidence that it may have been a Russian space object that re-entered and crashed. They found strange writing on the object, which later was sort of theorized it was like Russian writing on it. So I think there's a real chance it was a Russian object, but definitely something happened there. So it's still a really interesting case.
Don?
Yeah, I concur. I don't know if I would go as out on a limb as Tracy just did about it being Russian, but it's not inconceivable that it could have been Russian. But remember, this is in the middle of the Cold War, the space race. We had signed treaties with the USSR that we wouldn't, if we got our hands on any of their stuff, we'd give it back to them right away. If we reneged on that, it would have been a major faux pas.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I look, I served in Vietnam. The government tells me something, I'm going to check it 17 ways from Sunday before I buy it.
And of course, it turns out that the Soviet satellite that came down the following day on the other side of the planet. So that excuse doesn't hold water.
Okay.
Next case, let's try the Pascagoula abduction of Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting things about almost all abduction cases. It's one of the more bizarre ones. The creatures that were seen are very strange and not, I think, widely seen by other people. But it certainly seems like it was a real experience. If anyone that's heard either of these guys interviewed, even all these years later, you just can't believe they cooked this up as some kind of elaborate hoax. So I think it is a good case.
I agree. I think this is a case that has many, many items of very high strangeness. Whether it was alien, ET, or something else. I'm trying to recall right now, several years back, I read something. I believe Hickson at one point had come forward. Now, I could be wrong because I'm going from memory, but he suggested he felt or thought that somebody might have been firing a projectile at him, not a bullet, but like a hypodermic needle or something.
Yeah, he mentioned that when he was being held by one of the aliens, that he felt an injection, and Charles Hickson said the same thing.
Right. So, you know, a lot of high strangeness there. What it was, problematical.
Yeah. All right. Next case, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction.
Well, Betty and Barney Hill is like it's like the ultimate abduction case, because it's sort of I guess they said it's the first real time that anything like that has come to the public. Absolutely great case, and there's a million reasons why, but I'd be shocked if I ever found out that was not a real case.
I totally concur, and let's not forget, regardless of how many naysayers there are, the Marjorie Fish star map came out of that abduction case.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you guys a quick aside here. When Bud Hopkins was doing his research and came up with the idea that the root of all abduction cases was sexual or biological, that they were taking sperm and ova and everything from abductees, Hopkins was really uneasy with this. He knew that when he came forward with this, there'd be people that would really come after him for saying that. But that was what he was finding in so many of these cases. And so the skeptics came forward and said, well, if that's what really happens in abduction cases, why didn't that happen with Betty and Barney Hill? It didn't. So that was the way it stood for years. And then when Benjamin Simon, the shrink that worked with Betty and Barney Hill, died, they went into his records and they found out that there was one detail from the Betty and Barney Hill case that was kept out of the book, The Interrupted Journey, because it was too embarrassing to Barney Hill. And he insisted that they don't repeat it. And it's the same thing that Hopkins was finding years later. And that's just too big of a coincidence.
And Dr. David Jacobs, the same thing, that they were taking.
David Jacobs, yes, that's right.
And let's not forget that at that time, we're talking about very early 60s, this was a biracial married couple.
Mm-hmm.
And they had even more reason, that they didn't want or need any publicity. All right. Because, back then it was a totally different world when it came to, black and white relations. So yeah, that was just another reason that caused me to totally believe what those two people were saying.
Yep.
All right. Let's move on to our next rapid fire case. Rendlesham Forest / Bent Waters incident. Go.
I would say that's one of the best cases of all time. It's so multi-layered. This thing happened over several days, or it's either 2 or 3 days. seen by a number of, impressive people, lots of detail, high strangeness. Now, what's really most interesting in a lot of ways about the case is if you want to look at the way skeptics explain away UFO cases, this is a classic example. I mean, they found out that there was a lighthouse somewhere off in the distance of where this incident happened, and they decided, oh, that's it, they saw the lighthouse. Now, with the fact that that didn't fit any of the rest of the story, didn't matter, but a lot of publicity went out that the case had been solved and that it was actually misidentification of a lighthouse, which is insane. But this is one of the reasons I first got interested in UFOs. The first book that I ever read when I think I was in junior high school, the explanations of these objects was so tortured and so nonsensical to me and so desperate to come up with something. I said, hey, if they're fighting this hard to explain these things away, there must be something to it. That's the way I felt. And to this day, I mean, some of the explanations of these things are just absolutely ridiculous. And Don and I could probably spend hours just talking about who the worst skeptics are. There's some that are particularly heinous, So anyway.
My quick question about the Rendlesham Forest case is, why did they disarm the airmen before they sent them out to investigate?
Because they were on British soil. Okay.
Oh,
even the U.S. military, once they leave the military,
having a nuclear weapons base there secretly is okay, but
that was on basically American soil. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But going over into the forest, now they're on sovereign British territory.
Right.
And the Brits get really funky.
My wife and I recently saw a TV show, I think it was called Paranormal Witness, and they spent the entire episode, it was 60 minutes, on the Rendlesham Forest case. And they reenacted a lot of things, tracked down people that had not been interviewed before, that had firsthand knowledge of it. And I said to my wife afterwards, I said, God, I'd almost forgotten how great this case is, because there's so much to it. It's just like, to come away from that thinking that something did not really happen, you have to be an LSD, really. In my mind, it's just totally implausible. So it's a great case, Gil, I think.
One way that I've always looked at these cases, and I do it actually without even consciously thinking about it, I revert to my investigator mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And the case itself on the surface was fascinating. But I then, over a long period of time, looked at a lot of other aspects of it. Now, for example, and to me, this is one of the most telling. One of the principals there in the Air Force at that time was a fellow by the name of John Burroughs. He's fairly well known today with the Bentwaters case. And actually, when you look at what Burroughs was put through by the government in the aftermath of this case, is mind-boggling. He was having some physical problems.
Talk about MK Ultra, what they did to this guy. Sodium pentothal, lie detector tests. They debriefed him hard. Yeah, this was very rough handling.
So
what
anyway,
else you got, Gil?
No, I'm not done.
Oh, okay.
I'm not done. So
sorry.
He went in for some physical relief to the VA, the Veterans Administration. His freaking medical records were classified. He had to go to a U.S. senator's office to intercede on his behalf to have his medical records released.
That's right. I remember
Okay.
that.
Now I could go more into that, but enough said about that. Then there was an individual that initially tried to grab a big chunk of that story, a guy by the name of Larry Warren, who was not even present, okay, when this case first broke, creating years of turmoil.
Yeah.
All right. With this case. Finally,
not
the guy
least,
withdrew.
not least for our personal friend, Peter Robbins.
Exactly. Exactly. So, that is in many ways a seminal case with a lot of twists and turns. And you've got to have patience if you really want to know what the hell happened, to be willing to go in and dig and dig and dig and dig.
Well, if it hadn't been for Deputy Base Commander Charles Hall's write-up of that incident and the tape recording that he made and copied because they wanted the original, this case might not be the big case that we know it to be today.
And once again, this is a case involving tactical nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And this storage area was scanned by the UFOs.
Right.
Okay. They scanned the tactical nukes. Now, whether they were affected or not, it never came out, but they were there looking at them. So that should tell you a hell of a lot right there.
Now, I do want to go off topic just briefly. Tracy, I know I've been getting a lot of questions about sliders and your hashtag Bring Back Sliders campaign. And just to head those off to the pass, what, if any, updates do you have? And have you seen the video of John Rhys Davies talking about wanting to bring back sliders?
Well, the hashtag campaign, I had nothing to do with that. I really don't know anything about that. Not connected with me. What it was very simply was, what it was one of the Fox executives that was originally involved in buying the show came back and said, "Oh my God, Sliders was so great. It's time for a reboot. Let's do it." So she came to me. I said, "Hey, that sounds fine with me." She went to Jacob Epstein, who was an executive producer on the second season. And three of us put our heads together, and I cooked up a new story for the reboot of how we would explain why it's all these years later and everybody has aged, et cetera, et cetera. We really loved it. I think the fans would have really, really liked it. It was very faithful to the original idea of the show. And I was talking to Clevant Derricks all the time about it, and we were ready to go. And then we had 2 meetings with the executives who have sort of succeeded the Universal Studios executives in the old days. It's new companies. And I'd say if we met with 8 executives over 2 meetings, 7 of them, in my opinion, knew nothing about sliders at all and just came in kind of scratching their heads. Then we found one guy who was going to be at a meeting who claimed to be a big fan of the original show, and we all thought, oh, great, so this is going to work now. We went in and we pitched it to him, too, and they came back to us and said, well, we just are wondering, why now? What makes now the time for sliders? So we want you guys to just kind of put a cork in it for now, and we'll revisit it down the road. And that's where we are. We haven't gone any further than that. And whether it will ever happen again, I do not know. What's too bad is that the new story, and we had some new characters too, I think really would have been really well received.
Tracy, can I
Tracy,
ask you a question?
Sure.
Where exactly did they want you to put the cork?
I can't say that even on this show. Yeah.
I do want to briefly play a clip. I'm going to do that now, and let's see if they delete my channel for it.
I wanted to just mention sliders, and I wondered how often that comes up from fans, and it's always felt like a show that was very much ahead of its time, dealing with parallel universes, which have become a lot more popular with the MCU and that sort of stuff. It's something that I feel would be quite good for a reboot at this point as well.
It would be lovely to reboot it. It's one of the big annoyances of my life. Partly because I mishandled it, but also partly because they didn't understand what they had. They had potentially their Star Trek. They had something you can go anywhere in space, anywhere in time. And the opportunities that presents are just limitless, technically limitless. And I just got very annoyed with the imitation of other shows. We did the Night of the Living Dead, we did the Morlocks and the Eloi, we did the robot thing, we did the Species thing, we did Tremors, we did Twister. Of course, our Twister was different. Twisters go like that, getting bigger. Ours was bigger at the bottom, getting smaller for some absurd. I remember conversations like, you have a neutron star. Yes, and it's rotating, and the X-rays are going to scorch the Earth. Yes, but do you understand what a neutron star does? And more than that, you now have 3 neutron stars. A neutron star is an immensely dense star. Do you actually understand what happens to planets when they are exposed to a something as dense, exerting such a gravity field as that? We checked with the scientists, and he said, "Could we have a cluster of neutron stars?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure that they said you could have a cluster of neutron stars, but they didn't mean it in the solar system." Anyway, and their neutron stars, revolved at something like once every 24 hours. A neutron star spins so rapidly, it can sometimes be spinning, in a number of times per second, let alone anything else. With this lethal, exudation of gamma radiation and every other sort of killer radiation you can concoct. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Yes. It is very odd, isn't it, how one's failures linger with you far more than your successes. We should reboot Sliders. And my idea and proposal was that we regroup the original 4, which can be done, and then we, after a couple of seasons, what we're doing through the seasons is rescuing a few people, testing them to see how the public responds to these characters, and using that essentially as a casting process, so that by the end of season 2, they would have certainly lost me, and perhaps eventually 1 or 2 of the others, leaving Quinn, essentially now being the Max Arturo as well as the young Quinn, the older Quinn. And if you've got the right new blood in there with the chemistry that attracts the audience, and you've got good writing, then you could run it for 8, 9 seasons and then stop it then, and rest it for another 10, 15 years. and use the ones who was really successful in the second thing as part of the new reboot for the series. The other thing that I wanted to do was to bring in other writers. Every week I would get a script sent to me by some bright lad from USC or NYU University and this sort of thing, and you look at it and you think this is a perfect script. It's original, and the it was excluded from the writer's trough. They did not want anybody else to get in there and take work away. And I understand that in a way, but a show like that needs ideas. And I would get professors running up to me in UCLA, outside in Westwood, in LA, and they would say, "Look, whatever you do, please don't mock science. It is so hard to get people involved in science that we need to do everything we can to make it good." And that's a responsibility that people should recognize and accept. Yes, let's reboot Sliders.
So I was just curious if you'd seen that.
Well, I haven't seen that, and John and I had a really nice talk a few months back, and John always really did want the show to be as good as possible, and he became kind of difficult over it because sometimes he was very perturbed with the way it was going, and I certainly 1000% agree with him about the latter 2.5 seasons. Every episode seemed to be just a parody of a movie. He didn't mention Anaconda. That was one. Anaconda, Twister. You could go on forever. It was so disgusting to me that at this point, my name was still appearing on the credits each week, but I couldn't have been more far removed from what they were doing. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was awful. And to be honest with you, I'm so amazed that there are so many devoted Sliders fans to this day after what we did to them, because the show just went off the rail and it just became something pretty miserable for the last few years. One other quick example would be, I created this thing called the Cro-Mags, which were supposed to be the villains of Sliders. They were actually Sliders themselves, right? And the one thing I wanted to do, and I insisted when I wrote the first episode with them, I don't want them speaking English. I don't want them, being, super dumb villains. After I left the show, they elevated the Cro-Mags, so they were appearing all over the place, like basically Klingons with bad teeth. That's what they were at that point.
I was just going to say like Klingons, yeah.
Yeah, and it was miserable. And I mean, it was humiliating for me because we worked so hard to get this off the ground, and we had such a good start to the series, and we had wonderful actors, and we did have some really good scripts. And the studio and the network had sort of gotten together and decided that I was being too difficult to get in line with what they wanted to do. So I left after 2.5 years, and oh my God, I was just terrified at what the show became after that. It was awful. And that's still to this day, when we talk about rebooting it, some people just remember the stupid, Sliders period. It's hard to get by it. I'm surprised more people have been able to. But that's the story on Sliders. As of right now, who knows what the future will bring.
Is it safe to say that Sliders is in development hell at the moment?
In general, yes. It's interesting also about John when I talked to John a few months back, God, you could hear how he's mellowed with his older age. He's just much more easygoing. He kept calling me Tracy, my boy. Tracy, my boy. He said that over and over again, but he said it like affectionately.
Sure.
Whereas when we were doing the show, he could be a pretty intimidating figure. But I think it's because he really wanted the show to be good. He used to tell me all the time, this could be the next Star Trek. So
Absolutely.
I was really interested to hear what John said. Yeah. Gil, can we go back to your question about the most important cases or the best cases?
Sure. Fire away.
There were three. Yeah, there were three I wanted to mention. I'm curious to see if Don agrees with this. First of all, I think the Socorro, New Mexico.
3 minutes and 15 seconds left.
Okay, well, I'll be quick. The Socorro, New Mexico case, also known as the Zamora case, absolutely a seminal case to me. It's the one that turned Hynek around. It's a fantastic case. That'd be one of my all-time favorites. And I think that the Washington overflights that Don mentioned in, I think, 52 were very important because the whole subject suddenly became, front page news because they seem to be appearing in mass all over the nation's capital. And I think that right. And I think that led to a lot of things down the road as to what happened, not necessarily in a good way, but I think that's really important. And last but not least, if any of your listeners can get their hands on the McMinnville photograph, also known as the Trent photos, I love that case. First of all, I know a lot about it. It's very interesting the more you get into it. But the object that was photographed, to me, is so alien. You look at that thing and you just say it's nothing like anything we would make. We just wouldn't design something like this. And here's this huge object that at first they thought was not so big but close to the camera. But they did extensive testing on it, computer enhancements and things, and they found out that it was a very large object, a long way from the camera, the size of like a 747. And if anyone has never seen the photo, I just encourage them, take a look at it, because I think that's really a fascinating photograph.
Yeah,
I totally agree with your three cases, Tracy. Totally agree.
Okay, good. That's why we get along, Don.
You can search on McMinnville, Oregon UFO probably and find those photos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or the Trent photos. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring a mod on, and we can spin the wheel and see who our lucky winner is this week to win some UFO magazines autographed by the one and only legendary Don Ecker. Any mod at all. And while we're waiting for a mod to come on, Don, was there anything that you wanted to add to whatever that Tracy just mentioned?
No, I said that the three cases that he mentioned, the DC overflights, the Lonnie Zamora Socorro case, which is what the hell was that? Is a huge case, and especially what later happened to Officer Zamora. And we ready?
We have Canadian Spider-Man with us.
Hi, thank you for being here, Don and Tracy both. Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Nice shirt.
Been our pleasure. Thank you.
Here, I'll do my best to make Canadian Spider-Man big there. So
yeah,
nice,
an awesome shirt.
Do you have a spinner wheel for us?
I think his camera locked up. Oh,
There he
there
is.
he is.
Canadian Spider-Man, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Do you have a spinner wheel for us? Maybe yes, maybe no.
No, I can hear you. Yeah.
Do you have a spinner wheel for us?
I do.
Okay, great.
Share audio. Click on that. Yes, it's coming to you now.
Great. There we go. Now, this is not the rocket to monetization contest, but it's a spinner wheel, and that's good enough for me. So whenever you're ready, let her rip.
Let's try spinning the wheel, I think is what Cardinalson said. All right, ready now, Cardinalson?
Yep.
All right.
I always get nauseous when that happens.
Oh!
Oh, Canadian Spider-Man. He's our big winner.
Oh!
Wait a minute. Wait. Something ain't hitting
I'm
me
sorry.
right.
No, my mods are also eligible to win.
I won.
So-
Yeah. that
Congratulations.
was- it's the computer.
And another thing is that Canadian Spider-Man is on vacation in Mexico, and so he's doing this all remotely. So I do appreciate.
Well, that's got to be warmer than Canada right now.
That's right. Yeah.
Don't drink the water, Canadian Spider-Man.
Well, he's in Puerto Vallarta, so I think the water's probably okay.
Okay.
South. Yeah, south.
And lots of congratulations in the chat. Everybody knows and loves our friendly neighborhood Canadian Spider-Man. So thanks very much for that. And I want to wish you the fantastic rest of your vacation, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cardinalson.
The videos look great, so keep them coming.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks for being here.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Thank you.
bet.
Thank you.
I'm honored. No. All joking aside, thank you.
You bet.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. So that is going to do it for us today. I want to thank Tracy Tormé and Don Ecker for being my guests tonight on Into the Fringe. Next week, we are going to have Micah Hanks on, and he'll be giving away a copy of his book, The UFO Singularity.
Oh, tell Micah I said hi, will you?
Oh, sure.
I think he's a great researcher.
I may even just invite you to drop in if you want to crash the show, because that happens quite a bit. As a matter of fact, he likes it when people do that. So
Well, sure, he doesn't have to talk so much.
yeah. He already has like 7 podcasts. So talk about a sore throat. My goodness. Before we go, however, I did want to ask, Don, where can people find out more about you online? And could you please briefly plug DRM again?
Yeah. Well, right now, DMR is on hiatus. There's a possibility that it may come back in January. I've got no firm information on that. Howsoever, I am doing a UFO talk show every week on Wednesdays at 8 a.m., 8 usually to 9:30, sometimes 10, on the Pop Culture Minefield channel with Gary Kissel.
And that's Pacific time.
8 a.m. Pacific, yes, which would be 11 Eastern. On Wednesday afternoons, we just started a couple of weeks ago a new show on KGRA called Dangerous Military Nerds. Kissel and I both. And it's a show with nerds, him and I being nerds with, well, a lot of the stuff that we have talked about, for example, here today.
You know, you might get Walter Bosley involved in that.
Ah, that's right. That's right.
He's a military nerd.
Yes,
he's
he
dangerous.
is.
He's really dangerous.
Yes, he is. But anyway, that's at 1 p.m. Wednesdays on KGRA. That's 1 p.m. Pacific time. So Dangerous Military Nerds, we're just like other nerds, only we're dangerous. So there you go.
Good deal. And Tracy, how can people stay apprised of what you're up to?
They have to. My wife is encouraging me to put more of this stuff out into the universe. I've kind of been, working quietly on my own for a while, and if something like the sliders thing comes back or something like that, I'm sure, Gil, you'll be the first to know.
So just stay tuned.
I
to the
won't.
Cardinal
You
Sin
won't
channel.
tell me first, Tracy?
You'll be second.
Oh, I'm
First and
crushed.
second. Yeah.
Okay. So stay tuned to the Cardinal Sin channel for more from Tracy. And I think we'll probably have Tracy back on pretty soon. Once again, thank you both. It was a great show. Glad to have you and look forward to having you both again.
You bet,
And
Gil.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap
Thank you,
things
fellas.
up. So it's
Talk to you
Cardinal
both
Sin.
soon.
Happy holidays, my friend.
Happy holidays.
You too, buddy.